The way it is with a gas car, they might practically give it to you, like I think some of the big car companies are giving them away, but then you add up the repairs and the gasoline over the years, and that's where the money is.
You know, Chris, I open all these big ads from the oil companies these days, and they're touting all this cool alternative fuel research that they're supporting, our hydrogen future, for instance. I mean, that could undermine their business model, yet they seem to be embracing some alternatives.
If hydrogen can do a better job as an energy carrier than electricity, then by gosh, it should be the carrier of choice. The problem is, it's not even close.
How far will this car ride on that amount of fuel?
It gets approximately about, maybe about 100, 125 miles.
A fuel cell car powered by hydrogen made with electricity uses 3 to 4 times more energy than a car powered by batteries.
This is the beginning of some fantastic technology, and thanks for having us out here. We're going to look at some other vehicles here in a minute, but you know, hydrogen is the wave of the future.
Well, hydrogen fuel cell was a big surprise for us as filmmakers, because California, when they said, okay, car companies, you don't have to make electric cars anymore, you win. And the car companies said, great, we'll build you zero-emission vehicle hydrogen fuel cell cars. And we were all very excited about them. But as we began to look at the evidence, it turns out that hydrogen fuel cell is a really bad deal. And it certainly doesn't warrant quite all the enthusiasm it's been getting.
Well, what's wrong with hydrogen? I mean, it would be cleaner.
Well, I think the reason the oil industry likes hydrogen so much is that hydrogen is basically a way for them to ship something around in their trucks to not charging stations, but fueling stations, just like oil. It's the same exact paradigm for the oil industry.
As opposed to plugging something in your garage.
Plugging in, very different. The oil industry doesn't want people plugging in. They want people filling up. So hydrogen works for them in that sense. But this is all 15, 20 years down the road if they perfect this technology. And the work we did, the research we did on this film, indicates that hydrogen fuel cell is a lot farther off than industry would have you believe.
So you're not intrinsically against it. It's just that you are, from your study of this, skeptical that this is something that could come to our environmental aid anytime soon.
Yeah, that's really it. I mean, electric cars, battery-powered electric cars, is a technology that exists today. We could all have them. We could have millions of them on the street right now, working very effectively, using domestically created electricity, charging off solar panels. Hydrogen fuel cell, which they convinced California to wait for, is 10, 15 years off. And unfortunately, it turns out to be a much less efficient user of energy than if you just used a battery in the first place.
So your film actually renders judgment in some of these cases. You stamp on your screen guilty when it comes to the car companies. They would argue with that. You stamp on the screen guilty when it comes to the oil industry. They would argue about that. But what about you and me, us, the consumer? I mean, we may not have run out initially. I lived in California at the time. I didn't think to get an EV1. Yeah. Maybe I'm partly guilty in this story.
This is why we took on the consumer as part of the suspects for our story.
But ultimately you don't lay blame on the consumer?
Well, no, ultimately we do. Really? We in fact, when we first showed this to some of our producers, they're like, I'm not sure you want to make the consumer guilty. I mean, after all, they're your audience for your movie.
People who pay money to get in to see this movie. But you do have a guy in the film who, about the consumer, says this: when we hear energy efficiency, I'm paraphrasing, when we, the consumer, hear energy efficiency, he says, we think smaller cars, we think cold houses, we think living like Europeans.
Right, right. Well, it's really true, isn't it? I mean, ultimately, we as consumers have a lot of herd mentality, and whatever's hot, we go and we buy. And clearly, when the electric car came out in the 90s, everybody was buying SUVs.
When the SUVs first came out, people were like, I can't drive that.
That big old
Special
thing?
ladies, that's a tank.
I can't see out of that.
I'm going to murder somebody in that. That's too
That's
big.
too big for me.
But they convince people, this is safer. You need a big car.
You need this for your family.
The idea of a penny pinching EV1 that was super green you know, that didn't get a lot of traction, whereas the idea of a gigantic SUV that would, you know, crush your neighbor, that did get a lot of traction.
The commercials were about SUVs. Your neighbor had an SUV. And
it also helped, as your film points out, there was a big tax break for many people if you bought an expensive SUV.
That's right. You could get, if you bought a 6,000-pound SUV or more, you could get, I think, a $100,000 tax deduction as a small business owner.
And 6,000 pounds is a pretty big vehicle.
Yes, it's very big. In fact, a lot of these cars are too big to go on residential streets, but they've never enforced those laws. The problem is that the electric car was given small incentives, and a lot of times government incentive makes a big difference in what succeeds and fails.
All right, so the electric car in that version doesn't make it. But, I mean, look around you now. The so-called hybrid is hotter than the San Diego freeway during a midsummer rush hour. I mean, everyone's grabbing those things. Success there.
Yeah, it's terrific. The hybrids are taking off. And this is a great thing because hybrids get people used to the idea of having electricity in a car. In fact, you'll find that when people drive hybrids, within the first couple months, you begin to see them just trying to keep their car in electric mode. They don't want to hear that gas engine turn over. And I think this is very good.
So we can change behavior, what this shows.
Yeah, but the problem with the hybrids is that they still run on gasoline.
There's still a tailpipe, there's still some pollution when the gas engine turns on.
Yeah. And you still have the internal combustion engine.
Well, that's interesting to me. In the film, you could have left it with these images of death, the demise of the car, but you don't. You come back toward the end of the film with a different vision of the future.
I think the United States is particularly good at creating innovation. And even though the electric cars in our film were destroyed, a lot of new electric technology is coming to forefront now. For instance, there's the plug-in hybrid.
Plug-in hybrid?
Yes.
A hybrid now, you never plug in. It either you turn it over, the gas engine runs it, and puts energy into the electric part of it, but it doesn't plug in the wall.
Right, yeah. Yeah, the difference with a plug-in hybrid is you take your hybrid car, and at nighttime you plug it in your garage, and it charges overnight, and then the first 40, 50 miles of your next day driving is all electricity. So your gas never kicks on. So suddenly you're seeing the equivalent of 150 miles per gallon in a car.
And if your batteries run down, then there's a little engine to get you where you're going.
Then the engine turns on and keeps you going.
So some people are making these modifications, turning hybrids into the plug-in kind?
Right now it's mostly people doing conversion kits. But there are rumblings from Toyota and others that plug-in hybrids may be coming around the corner. I'm hoping to hear it out of General Motors and Ford, too. They could do it. It's just they don't, so far they've lacked the will to really invest in electricity as a way to power cars.
But if you're bucking for sort of the ultimate revolution here in clean transportation, you got to have a bigger coalition than these kind of Tom Hanks, Ed Begley Jr. characters that you got in the film who love their EV1 cars. You need more people focused on this.
Yeah. Well, in the film, at the end of the film, we have what is this new coalition? And this includes, what group do we have? We have What Would Jesus Drive?
So you have Christian evangelicals interested in making the world a better place.
And we have the tree huggers, and we have a lot of Reagan people that are a part of a group called Set America Free.
Well, you're talking about them as neoconservatives. What's the neoconservative pony in this race?
Well, I think conservative because these are people that look at the transportation issues from a national defense point of view. And they go, if we spend so much money protecting the flow of oil
from the Middle East,
this is not good. Whereas if we use electricity, this is domestically produced, and it's possible that it can be renewable. This is good for the long term. So these neoconservatives, if you will, have joined with environmentalists and really anybody who says, okay, I'm done with gasoline, how can I get off this stuff?
I mean, given the price of gas these days, given the uncertainty of the Middle East and so forth, one wonders if these car companies are having second thoughts about their decisions involving the electric car.
I think they really are. I mean, car companies have all of these big cars sitting in their lots right now. And even last week, Rick Wagoner at GM said that axing the EV1 was probably the worst decision he made on his watch. It's too bad. I feel like the electric car story was an example of us losing 2 years, maybe 5 years on a time when we don't really have a lot of time to play with.
Well, Chris, thank you for this.
Oh, it's been great.
Chris Payne is the director of Who Killed the Electric Car. It opens in New York and LA June 28th, and it's likely to show up in a theater near you sometime this summer.